Welcome, get comfortable. The rain or fire sound is here, and so is tonight's story. Before we begin, where are you listening from, and is this helping you sleep? Subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss our future narrations. Story 1: The Night My Cabin Inherited Me. I didn't believe in family curses until I started turning into my grandfather. The first sign wasn't a ghost or a whisper in the dark. It was the taste of Earl Grey tea with 2 sugars, a habit I'd always found disgusting, suddenly seeming like the only thing worth drinking. My name is Dev. 2 months ago, my estranged grandfather passed away, leaving me, his only living relative, a remote cabin in the dense, ancient woods of the Pacific Northwest. The lawyer's letter called it a bequeathal of legacy. I called it a chance to finally sell something and pay off my student loans. I arrived at Blackpen Cabin on a Tuesday, the sky a bruised purple with impending rain. The place was exactly as you'd imagine: weathered cedar logs, a moss-shingled roof, and a heavy iron-framed door that groaned like a living thing when I pushed it open. The air inside was cold and still, smelling of pine sap, dust, and something else, a faint, sweet odor like overripe apples. The furniture was all heavy, dark wood, draped in yellowing sheets. I found the setup oddly meticulous. A single armchair by the stone fireplace was uncovered, a reading lamp beside it, a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius' Meditations on the side table, spine cracked at a specific page. On the kitchen counter, a single mug, washed and upturned on a dish towel. It felt less like a house left empty and more like one whose occupant had just stepped out for a walk. I shrugged it off as the eccentricities of an old man living alone. My first night was uneventful, just the creaking of old timber and the distant hoot of an owl. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, in the musty bedroom that had been his. The changes were subtle at first. I've always been a city person, a light sleeper attuned to sirens and traffic. But here, I began sleeping 10, 12 hours at a stretch, waking up feeling heavy-limbed and disoriented. I'd catch myself standing at the grimy kitchen window, staring at the same patch of ferns for minutes on end, just watching the light shift. My own thoughts started to feel crowded. I'd reach for a can of soda and my hand would hover, a strange internal revulsion rising up, before I'd fill a glass with tap water instead. My lower back began to ache with a dull, familiar throb I'd never felt before. I chalked it all up to the change of air, the stress of the legal stuff, the profound silence playing tricks on my mind. So, what about you? Have you ever been somewhere that just felt wrong? Not in a dramatic, haunted house way, but in a quiet, seeping way that changes how you think? Let me know in the comments. The first real event happened on the 5th night. I was reading on my laptop when the power flickered and died, plunging the cabin into a blackness so complete it felt solid. As I fumbled for my phone's flashlight, I heard it. A slow, deliberate scrape, scrape, scrape coming from the front porch. It was the sound of a rocking chair moving on old planks. My blood turned to ice. I'd brought no chair onto the porch. I stood frozen in the dark, listening to the rhythmic creak. Then it stopped. A moment later, 3 slow, heavy knocks shook the front door. Boom, boom, boom. Not frantic, authoritative, expectant. I didn't breathe. After an eternity, I heard footsteps not away, but along the porch, pacing slowly to the living room window. The curtain was open. I dropped to the floor, crawling behind the sofa. I saw a shadow blot out the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. It stood there, a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette, perfectly still for what felt like hours. Then it was gone. I spent the night huddled on the floor, my phone dead, convinced I was the victim of some backwoods prowler. The next morning, in the harsh, revealing daylight, I investigated. No footprints in the damp earth around the porch, no rocking chair. But on the porch railing, I found a single, long-stemmed pipe, cold to the touch, the bowl packed with fresh, unsmoked tobacco. My grandfather's pipe. I'd seen it in a photo the lawyer sent. A wave of nausea hit me, not from fear, but from a sudden, intense craving for the smell of that specific tobacco. I threw the pipe into the woods. That afternoon, I decided to clear out the bedroom closet, a task I'd been avoiding. The clothes were all his: thick flannel shirts, stiff denim overalls, heavy wool coats. As I pulled an old shoebox from the top shelf, I lost my grip. It tumbled down, spilling its contents, not shoes. Photographs, dozens of them, black and white and faded color, and they were all of me. Me as a child at a birthday party I barely remembered. Me in my college graduation gown. Me, just last year, walking into my apartment building. My breath caught in my throat. My grandfather had cut all ties before I was born. My parents said he was a bitter, cruel man who wanted nothing to do with us. How did he have these? Under the photos was a journal. The entries weren't dated. The handwriting was a frantic, spidery scrawl. The same phrase over and over, sometimes neatly written, sometimes carved into the paper. The blood remembers. The house hungers. It finishes the portrait. The last entry in a calm, steady hand read, "The canvas arrives tomorrow. I am ready to be completed." The date beside it was the day I arrived. That night the false safety came. Nothing happened. No knocks, no shadows, no sounds. I felt a fool. A prowler, a creepy collection of photos from a lonely old man, my own paranoid exhaustion, it all had a logical, if unsettling, explanation. I even managed a shaky laugh at myself. I built a fire in the hearth, the warmth pushing back the damp chill. For the first time, the cabin felt almost welcoming. The sweet, apple-like smell was stronger near the fireplace, but it was almost pleasant. I felt a deep, pervasive calm settle over me. The ache in my back faded. I looked around at the dark wood, the stone, the shelves of his books, and felt not fear, but a sense of rightness. I thought the nightmare was over. I was wrong. It was just beginning. I woke up not in my bed, but in the armchair by the dead fireplace. It was 3:07 a.m. I hadn't moved there in my sleep. It'd been placed. Panic surged, but it was a distant, muffled thing, like hearing a scream through thick glass. My body didn't respond. I couldn't move my limbs. I could only stare straight ahead at the large, ornate mirror above the mantelpiece. In the dim moonlight, I saw my reflection, but it wasn't just mine. My features seemed to be shifting, melting like wax. My jawline seemed broader, my hairline receding, deep lines etching themselves around a mouth that was not my own, settling into a grim, familiar frown. My own eyes, wide with terror, stared out from a face that was slowly becoming his. The taste of Earl Grey was overpowering in my mouth. The ache in my back was a sharp, specific pain, the old fracture he'd gotten in a logging accident, a story I'd only heard in passing. Then I felt him. Not in the room. Inside, a cold, heavy presence settling into the corners of my mind, a second consciousness unspooling in my skull. Memories that weren't mine flooded in, the feel of a specific axe handle, the smell of a long-dead dog, the bitter taste of regret towards a son my father he'd driven away. His thoughts were a slow, cold river, and mine were being drowned in it. The blood remembers, the thought came not in my voice. The house needs its keeper. A portrait is not finished until the last brushstroke. I realized with soul-crushing horror what the legacy truly was. He hadn't left me a cabin. He had left himself. The cabin was a vessel, a tuning fork resonating with his memory, and I was the blank canvas being painted over by his lingering essence. The supernatural wasn't haunting the cabin. It was baked into its very logs, and it was calling its own blood home to be remade. With a Herculean effort that felt like tearing my own mind in two, I forced a scream. The sound, raw and mine, shattered the paralysis. I stumbled from the chair, away from the mirror, but his consciousness clung like cobwebs. I could feel his preferences overriding mine, his memories feeling more real than my own. I knew with absolute certainty that if I stayed until sunrise, the transformation would be permanent. The dev I was would be gone, a final layer of paint on a finished portrait, and I would be the keeper of the woods, bitter and alone, waiting for the next generation of blood to arrive. I fled. I left everything, me laptop, my bag, the journal, and ran out into the freezing night, wearing only my pajamas. I didn't look back. I stumbled down the dark, overgrown driveway for 2 miles before I got a bar of signal and called a taxi from the nearest town. I never went back. I hired a lawyer to handle the sale of the cabin, all done remotely. They said the buyer was a reclusive older gentleman. The paperwork was oddly fast. I am back in my city apartment now. The sounds of traffic are a comfort, but sometimes in the quiet moments before sleep, I feel a twinge in my lower back, that old, specific ache. I'll reach for coffee and find myself staring at the tea bags in the cupboard. And last week I saw a photo online of the new owner of Blackpine Cabin. It was from a local paper, a blurry shot of him on the porch. He was turned away, but the set of his shoulders, the shape of his head, it was familiar. The caption said he was a quiet man, kept to himself. They called him Mr. Dev. The thing is, I never told anyone my name was Dev. I use a different name now, but the cabin, it seems, hasn't finished with its portrait. It's just waiting for the final brushstroke to dry. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill, that sense of something being deeply wrong, then you understand. Please, if you enjoyed this journey into the unsettling, give this video a like. It helps more than you know. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next tale from the shadows. And tell me in the comments, what's the one family heirloom or place you'd be too afraid to inherit? Story 2, The Rules We Broke in the Woods. I wasn't supposed to go back to the cabin, but I needed to know if the whispers were real. My name is Dev, and for most of my life, my family treated our old forest property like a dirty secret. We owned a cabin deep in the Washington woods, a place my grandfather built with his own hands, but we never used it. Not for vacations, not for getaways. It just sat there, a skeleton in a green closet, mentioned only in hushed, tense conversations that always ended with my father's stern, "Some places are better left to sleep." After he passed, the deed came to me along with a sealed envelope containing 3 rules, handwritten in his shaky script. Rule 1, never arrive after sundown. Rule 2, never light a fire in the main hearth. Rule 3, if you hear the trees whispering your name, do not answer. Do not listen, leave before dark falls again. I thought it was the rambling of a sick old man, a final piece of poetic nonsense. I was a pragmatic guy, an architect who believed in load-bearing walls and poured concrete, not fairy tales. So I decided to go. I'd assess the property, maybe fix it up, sell it, and use the money as a down payment on a real place in the city. My GPS lost signal about 10 miles from the turnoff, and the final dirt road was a scar through dense, ancient pines that seemed to lean inward, their branches scraping the roof of my car like bony fingers. I noticed the first unsettling detail then, the complete absence of sound. No birds, no insects, just the hum of my engine and the crunch of gravel. The second detail was the smell that seeped in even through the closed windows, not the clean scent of pine, but something damp and sweetly rotten, like forgotten fruit and wet soil. The third was the light itself. Even though it was only late afternoon, the forest was already submerged in a deep, emerald twilight, as if the trees were hoarding the sun. I pulled into the clearing as the last sliver of orange sky vanished behind the mountain ridge. I'd broken Rule 1 already. The cabin was a dark silhouette against the darker woods, a squat, shadowy thing with windows like black, sightless eyes. I fumbled with the old key, the metal cold against my skin, and stepped inside. The air was stale and frigid, carrying that same cloying, rotten sweetness. Using my phone's flashlight, I saw the main room was dominated by a massive stone hearth, its maw black and filled with cold ashes. My father's second rule echoed in my head, never light a fire in the main hearth. I scoffed, setting my bag down. Superstition, I muttered to the silence. The silence, I realized, was listening back. I decided to light the smaller wood stove in the corner for heat, the rational part of my brain arguing that the rules specified the main hearth. As the kindling caught, casting a small, sane circle of light, I felt a little better. I ate a cold sandwich, the noises of my chewing absurdly loud. That's when I heard the first whisper. It wasn't in the room, it was outside, woven into the sound of the wind through the million pine needles. A sigh that shaped itself almost clearly into 2 syllables, Diev. I froze, my breath fogging in the suddenly colder air. My rational mind supplied immediate alternatives, a creaking branch, the settling of the old cabin, my own tired brain misinterpreting white noise. So tell me, what's the one irrational rule or family superstition you've always wondered about? Something that never made sense but you were told to just follow? Put it in the comments below, because I am starting to think they all exist for a terrible reason. I spent a fitful night on the dusty couch, jumping at every creak and groan of the timber. The whisper didn't come again, and by the weak, gray light of morning, my fear seemed childish. The forest was just a forest. The cabin was just old. I spent the day assessing the structure, my professional mind taking over. The place was sound, surprisingly so. The only oddity was the main hearth. Upon close inspection, the stones weren't local granite. They were darker, smoother, almost oily to the touch, and they were set in a spiral pattern that drew the eye inward to the darkness. Carved into the lintel stone, almost worn away, were symbols that looked less like decoration and more like a warning. I took pictures, my skin crawling. As evening approached again, the dense twilight returned faster than I thought possible. The silence descended, heavier than before. I lit the wood stove again, but its warmth didn't penetrate the chill that seemed to emanate from the stone hearth. I was making notes when I heard it again, not a wind whisper this time. A clear, voice-like sound right outside the window beside me. A woman's voice, soft and impossibly sad. "Dev, you came back." My blood turned to ice. I didn't move. I barely breathed. Rule 3 echoed, "Do not answer, do not listen." I didn't answer. But I listened, and I heard it again from a different window. "It's so cold in the roots." Then another, a child's voice this time from near the door. "Can we come in? We're lost." The voices weren't threatening, they were pleading, mournful. A deep, primal part of me screamed that this was wrong, that this was the lure, the anglerfish's light. But another part, the part that remembered my father's grief-stricken face whenever the cabin was mentioned, felt a horrifying pity. What if they were lost souls? What if my family had abandoned them? The voices multiplied, layering over each other in a susurrating chorus of misery. "Light the fire, the big fire, it's so dark here." They were now coming from the hearth itself, the words slithering out of the black opening. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the sound was inside my skull. In a moment of sheer, frantic desperation, a stupid idea took hold. If I lit the hearth, maybe the light and heat would satisfy them, quiet them, show them peace so I could escape. I broke. I grabbed kindling and an old newspaper, ignoring the shrieking alarm in every neuron, and thrust it into the center of the stone spiral. I struck a match. The fire caught with an unnatural whump, not spreading slowly but erupting in a cold, blue-green flame that cast no heat. The voices stopped. A profound, deafening silence fell. I stumbled back, thinking for one blissful, idiotic second that I'd done it. I'd solved it. This was the false safety, the cruelest trick the woods could play. Then the flames turned a deep, bloody crimson, and the heat that blasted out was that of an opened furnace. And from within that fire, things began to crawl. Not emerge, but crawl, as if the hearth was not a fireplace but a hole, and they were climbing up from some deep, hot place below. They were human-shaped, but made of shifting ember and charred, cracking wood, their eyes glowing coals, their mouths open in silent screams that echoed the whispers. They didn't look at me with malice, but with a desperate, hungry recognition. They knew my name because they knew my blood. This was the Dark Family. Not a metaphor, a legacy. One of them, a tall, shimmering figure of ash, pointed a glowing finger not at me, but at the symbols above the hearth. In the hellish light, I finally understood them. They weren't just warnings, they were a bargain. A covenant. The fire wasn't forbidden because it attracted them. It was forbidden because it was the door. And my family's role for generations was to keep the door closed. By lighting it, I hadn't just invited them in, I had ended our watch. They poured into the room, not attacking, but passing around me, through me, their touch leaving searing cold burns. They flowed out the door into the waiting, silent woods. The last one, a small, child-shaped thing of flickering cinders, paused in the doorway. It turned its head, and in a crackle of burning pine, it spoke with the voice of the forest itself. "Thank you," it whispered. "The trees are so hungry. Grandfather kept us waiting so long." I ran. I left everything, bursting out into the night, the crimson glow of the cabin lighting my way as I fled down the path. I didn't look back until I reached my car, the engine screaming to life. In the rearview mirror, I saw the cabin, a blazing red eye in the blackness. And spreading out from it into the forest were dozens of smaller, moving points of red light drifting deep into the trees, heading toward the distant, unaware glow of town. I drive now endlessly some days, terrified of the dark, of the silence, of the smell of wood smoke. I sold the property to a young couple looking for a rustic retreat. I didn't tell them the rules. I thought if I passed on the curse, I might be free. But I know, in a way that has settled into my bones, that it doesn't work like that. The bargain is broken. The door is open, and sometimes, late at night, if the wind is just right and the world is quiet enough, I can still hear them, not whispering my name anymore. They're whispering the names of everyone I've ever loved, learning them one by one, their voices getting closer every time, because a door once opened can never truly be shut. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill, that sense of something lurking just outside the frame, then you understand. Please, if you enjoyed this journey into the dark, give this video a thumbs up. It helps more than you know. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next descent into the unexplained. And most importantly, tell me in the comments, what's the one family rule y'all never break again? Stay safe out there. Story 3, the rules my grandmother never told me. I found my grandmother's journal the day after she died, and I started breaking its rules immediately. My name is Ava, and I was 24, broke, and suddenly the sole inheritor of a crumbling family cabin in the deep woods of northern Maine. To everyone else, it was a burden, a relic. To me, it was a lifeline, a chance to escape the noise of my failed life in the city and maybe, just maybe, write the novel that was perpetually stuck in my head. The journal was tucked inside a rusted biscuit tin under a loose floorboard in the master bedroom, a detail mentioned in her will with a strange emphasis. The tin under the board, Ava. Leave it be, of course, that was the first thing I went for. The journal wasn't a diary of memories. It was a ledger of rules, page after page of neat, looping cursive outlining decrees for living in the cabin. Rule 1, the mirrors are to be covered with black cloth by sundown. Rule 2, do not answer the door after the third owl call. Rule 3, never, under any circumstances, acknowledge the reflections in the windows after dark. I scoffed, tossing the book onto the dusty quilt. Superstitious nonsense, the ramblings of an old woman who lived alone too long in the silence of the pines. I chalked it up to eccentricity, a charming quirk to tell my city friends about over-expensive coffee. The first night, I left the mirrors uncovered. I was tired from the drive, and the idea of searching for cloth in the gloom seemed ridiculous. The only sound was the sigh of the wind through the towering firs and the occasional distant hoot of an owl. Nothing happened. See, I thought smugly just stories. The unsettling details were subtle at first, woven into the fabric of the ordinary like dark threads. I'd find my pens rearranged on the desk, the chewed end of the one I used always pointing toward the largest window. The smell of my grandmother's lavender talcum powder would waft through a room I'd just cleaned, a scent that should have been buried decades ago. And the cold spots-sudden, piercing drafts that would slice through the cabin's warmth, lingering in doorways and in front of the covered mirrors I'd eventually, reluctantly, shrouded after a week of strange dreams. I told myself it was an old building settling, my imagination fueled by isolation and the eerie rulebook, but a part of me started to listen. I began following the rules not out of belief, but out of a growing, superstitious rhythm. Cover the mirrors, salt the thresholds. Be inside before the third owl call. Hey, while I am setting the scene for you, let me ask you something, because we're all friends here in the dark. What's the one family rule or superstition you were told growing up that still sticks with you, even if you don't really believe it? Put it in the comments. I read every single one. The escalation began with the sounds. It started as a faint, rhythmic scratching on the outer log walls, like the branches of a specific pine tree were tapping a pattern. But when I checked in the daylight, that tree was a good 15 feet from the house. Then came the whispers, not from inside, but from outside the windows. They were low, sibilant, and just on the edge of comprehension, like a radio tuned between stations, playing snippets of conversations I almost recognized. They'd stop the moment I pressed my ear to the cold glass. The final straw was the footprints. A crisp, early frost painted the clearing one morning, and radiating out from my front door in a perfect circle around the cabin were dozens of bare human footprints. They faced inward, all pointed toward the house, as if a silent crowd had stood there all night, watching me sleep. Panic, pure and electric, finally replaced my rationalizations. I devoured the journal, now treating it not as a curiosity but a survival manual. I found more rules deeper in. Rules about not looking at your own reflection in any dark surface. Rules about what to do if you heard your name called from the woods. You were to repeat a specific, nonsensical phrase in Old Norse, which my grandmother had phonetically written down. The journal's tone changed in the later entries. The neat loops became frantic scrawls. They watched through the glass. They want a door, a mirror is a door. A window is a mirror in the dark. Do not let them find a door. One night, a storm knocked out the power. I was ready, or so I thought. I had my battery lanterns, the fireplace roaring. I had salted every window sill and doorframe until the cabin looked like a pretzel shop. I sat in the center of the living room, wrapped in a blanket, reciting the Old Norse phrase like a mantra. The third owl called, then a fourth, a fifth. A whole chorus of them directly from the trees lining the clearing. And then they fell silent. In that absolute, crushing quiet, a new sound emerged. A soft, polite knock on the front door. Tap, tap. Tap. My blood froze. Rule 2 was explicit. Do not answer after the third owl call. I held my breath. The knocking traveled. Tap, tap, tap. On the living room window, I didn't look. I squeezed my eyes shut. It moved to the bedroom window. Tap, tap. Tap, then it was back at the front door. This time it wasn't a knock. It was the sound of fingernails slowly, deliberately dragging down the entire length of the wooden door. I broke. I screamed, "Go away." The scratching stopped. The silence that followed was even worse. It was a listening silence. Then, from right outside the large picture window, a voice. It was my grandmother's voice, but wet and garbled, like something speaking through a mouthful of soil. Ava, honey, let me in. I am so cold, my heart shattered. It sounded so real, so desperate. A wave of grief and guilt washed over me. What if she was out there? What if it was all a test and her spirit was stuck? The rational part of my brain was screaming, but the emotional, grieving part was reaching for the door latch. This was the false safety, the offer of an end to the fear, a reunion, an explanation. My hands trembled on the deadbolt. I almost turned it, but I looked up. In the black glass of the picture window, reflecting the orange glow of my fireplace, I didn't see the room behind me. I saw the clearing outside, and standing in it, facing the cabin, was a figure. It wore my grandmother's favorite shawl, but the shape underneath was all wrong, too tall, too thin, its limbs jointed at sharp, impossible angles. Its face was a smooth, dark oval, devoid of features except for the reflection of my own fireplace, which burned in the empty space where eyes should be, like two hellish pits. It wasn't calling me from outside. It was standing perfectly still, silent. The voice was a trick. The thing in the window reflection saw me seeing it. Its head tilted, a grotesque, bird-like movement. The climax was not a chase, it was a standoff. I was trapped. If I ran to another room, the windows were there. The mirrors, though covered, seemed to pulse with a hidden pressure. The thing in the reflection didn't move, it just watched. And then the voice came again, my grandmother's tender, chilling voice, but this time it didn't come from outside. It came from behind the covered mirror above the fireplace. Ava, we have your door. The cloth over the mirror began to bulge, as if something was pressing against it from another side, straining the fabric. The stitches at the seam of the black cloth started to pop, one by one, with tiny, sighing pings. I did the only thing the journal said to do if a door was compromised. I turned every light source toward its battery lantern, my phone flashlight, and I threw a bundle of sage from the hearth into the fire, creating a blinding, smoky burst of light and sparks directly at the mirror. A sound like shattering ice and breaking bones filled the cabin. The bulging cloth snapped flat. The reflection in the window showed an empty clearing. I spent the rest of the night bathed in light, facing the mirror, whispering the Old Norse phrase until my voice was raw and the sun finally, blessedly, rose. I left the cabin that morning. I live in a studio apartment now on the 12th floor. I have no mirrors. My windows are covered with shutters I never open after sunset. I still have the journal. I've added a new rule to the last blank page in my own writing. The ink looks shaky, scared. It says, Rule 87, they are not outside. They are in the glass, waiting for a light to go out. They learned my name. They might learn yours. I think they followed me, not all the way home, but part way. Because sometimes, late at night, when my phone screen goes dark, I see a reflection that isn't my own room in the black glass. And from the city streets 12 stories below, I'll hear it, faint but clear over the traffic, a sound of a single owl calling a fourth time. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill down your spine, you're not alone. Please show this channel some love by hitting that like button and subscribing for more tales from the shadows. Your support helps keep the lights on, and we all know how important that is. Tell me in the comments what you would have done in that cabin. And remember, be careful what you see in the dark. Story 4, The Silence My Grandmother Left Behind. My grandmother's final gift to me was a silence so profound, it swallowed every other sound in the world. My name is Lee, and I inherited the old family cabin deep in the Adirondacks. It wasn't a lavish bequest. The logs were gray with age, the plumbing groaned, and the nearest neighbor was a 5-mile hike through dense, whispering pines. But it was mine, a sanctuary from the relentless noise of my city lifeth traffic, the sirens, the endless digital pings. I packed my bags, quit my soul-crushing job, and drove north with a sense of giddy relief. The first week was paradise. I read books, I wrote in a journal, I learned the individual songs of the birds. The only oddities were small, easily dismissed. The absolute unnerving quiet at night, a vacuum that made my ears ring. The way the grandfather clock in the hall, which hadn't worked in decades, would sometimes give a single, hollow talk for no reason. And the smell. Not a bad smell, but a distinct one like ozone after a storm and old, dried lavender. It would drift through a room and then vanish. I want to ask you all something because I think about it a lot now. What's the one sound you truly couldn't live without? The hum of a refrigerator, distant traffic. For me, it was the sound of my own breath. You don't appreciate it until it's the only thing left. The escalation began with the birds. One morning, I woke up and the forest was mute. No chirping, no cawing, no rustle of squirrels in the canopy, just that immense, watchful silence. I stood on the porch, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach, straining to hear anything. I even clapped my hands, the sharp report dying instantly, absorbed by the trees. That was the day I found the first jar. Cleaning out a musty crawl space, my flashlight beam caught the glint of glass. It was a simple mason jar, sealed with wax, and inside was what looked like a handful of gray dust. But it wasn't dust. When I held it up, I saw they were tiny, perfect shapes, minuscule feathers, bits of insect wing, a sliver of bird skull. A collection of silence. A label on the side in my grandmother's elegant script read, Song Sparrow, June 1978. I found more. Dozens, Cicada Chorus, August 1985. Brooks Babel, April 1992. Thomas Laughter, October 1956. My grandfather's name. A cold dread seeped into my bones. This wasn't a hobby, this was curation. That night the silence became aggressive. I tried to play music, but the speakers emitted only a faint, strained hiss before dying. My phone's videos played back muted. The wind outside simply stopped. The pressure in the cabin changed like before a tornado, but the air was utterly still. And then I heard the first shush. It wasn't from the woods. It was inside, a long, deliberate exhale of a sound right next to my ear as I tried to sleep. I shot up, heart hammering, turning on every light. There was nothing. But the ozone and lavender smell was overpowering. The false safety came 2 days later. I was a nervous wreck, jumping at my own shadow. In a desperate bid for normalcy, I decided to make soup. I chopped vegetables, the thunk of the knife on the cutting board a comforting, solid rhythm. I turned on the radio, an old battery-powered thing, and after fiddling with the dial, a burst of static, garbled country music filled the kitchen. I almost wept with relief. The sounds were back, the oppressive weight lifted. I laughed at myself, thinking I'd let isolation and my discovery of those weird jars spook me into a paranoid frenzy. I ate my soup, the music playing, and for the first time in days, I felt peace. I went to bed actually feeling sleepy. The silence, I convinced myself, was just the unique acoustic of this remote place. My grandmother was just an eccentric collector. Everything was explainable. I was woken by the clock, not a talk, a tick. Then another, it was building a rhythm from the hallway. Tick. Tock, tick, tock. It was working, it was keeping perfect, monstrous time, and with each swing of the pendulum, another sound was stolen. The rustle of my blankets against my legs ceased, becoming a motion without texture. The frantic thud of my heart in my ears just vanished, leaving a terrifying hollow in my chest. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone before it left my throat, a silent, gaping mouth in the dark. I stumbled out of bed towards the door, but my footsteps made no sound. The world was being erased in layers. I ran downstairs, a phantom in my own home, driven by pure panic. The living room was moonlit, and there in my grandmother's rocking chair was a shape. It wasn't a person. It was a concentration of absence, a figure woven from the silence it had collected. It was the smell of ozone and lavender given form a tall, slender outline that seemed to drink the light and sound around it. It turned its head. It had no face, just a smoother, deeper patch of nothing where a face should be. From it emanated a profound, gravitational pull of quiet. My thoughts themselves felt muffled. On the table before it was a new, empty mason jar. A label was already placed. Lee's Fear, September. It reached out a hand that was not a hand, a tendril of pure stillness. I knew with absolute certainty that if it touched me, my final sound, me last gasp, my dying heartbeat would be sucked into that jar, sealed with wax and placed on a shelf for eternity. This was my grandmother's legacy, not a cabin. A guardian, a collector, and I was the final prized specimen. I did the only thing my screaming, silent mind could think of. I didn't try to make sound. I moved towards the source of it. I lunged not at the creature, but at the grandfather clock in the hall. I threw my entire, soundless weight against the ancient, polished wood. It teetered with agonizing slowness. The creature in the chair shifted, a ripple of displeasure in the air. The clock crashed down, and it made a sound. A glorious, catastrophic, wood-splintering, gear-shattering, cacophonous crash. The sound was a physical blast, a shockwave that shattered the vacuum. For a split second, the creature flickered like a disturbed reflection in water. I didn't wait. I fled out the front door into the silent woods, barefoot and in my pajamas. I ran until my lungs burned, though I couldn't hear my own ragged breaths. I don't know how I made it to the road or how long I stumbled before a trucker saw me and stopped. I am in a motel now, hundreds of miles away. I've written all this down. The police went to the cabin. They found nothing out of the ordinary, they said. No jars. No broken clock, just an empty, dusty old building. They think I had a psychotic break from isolation. Maybe I did, but the motel room is too quiet. The digital clock's soft glow makes no hum. The traffic outside seems muted, far away. When I try to speak, my voice comes out a whisper, strained and thin. The doctors say it's trauma. They're probably right, but last night I woke up thirsty. I reached for the glass of water on the nightstand. My fingers brushed the cool glass and I felt a faint, familiar vibration through the material. And I knew, with a chill that stopped my already quiet heart, that it wasn't the vibration of my touch. It was the last, fading echo of a sound being drawn out of the world, siphoned into a jar on a shelf I can no longer see. The collection continues, and my jar, I fear, is not yet full. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that creeping sense of dread, that's all I have left to share. Please, if you enjoyed this journey into the quiet, give this video a like, it helps more than you know. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next tale of terror. And in the comments below, tell me, what's the one sound you would miss the most? Stay safe out there and keep listening. Story 5, The Night My House Started Breathing. I should have burned the letter from my gray tant unread. It arrived on a Tuesday, the paper thick and yellowed like old skin, smelling of mothballs and something faintly metallic like dried blood. My name I've always written in a spidery, frantic cursive that seemed to claw its way across the envelope. I hadn't spoken to Anna Lara in over a decade, not since the strange incident at a family reunion where Shed gripped my wrist, her eyes milky with cataracts, and whispered, "The house remembers the ones who leave." We all just wrote it off as dementia. When the lawyer called to say Shed passed and left me her remote cabin in the Adirondacks, I saw it as a weird but potentially lucrative accident. A quick sale, a tidy profit, a fresh start after a brutal divorce. I was so wrong. The drive up was beautiful, all autumn fire and crisp air. But the closer I got, the more the silence of the woods felt heavy, watchful. The cabin itself, when I finally found it at the end of a washed-out logging road, was less charming and more defiant. It hunched against the pines, its dark timber looking less like wood and more like petrified bone. The key, a heavy iron skeleton key, was under a mossy rock exactly where the lawyer said it would be. It was cold, unnaturally so, and left a faint, rusty residue on my fingers. The first unsettling detail was the door. It wasn't locked. It was sealed. The wood around the frame had swollen or grown, as if the house had tried to digest the door. I had to shoulder it hard, the sound of tearing wood like a gasp, to get inside. The air that rushed out was warm, damp, and carried a scent I couldn't place, his own damp earth, and beneath it, the cloying sweetness of decayed flowers. The interior was a time capsule of faded floral wallpaper and heavy, dark furniture. Everything was clean, obsessively so, yet a fine layer of dust coated every surface. That was the second odd thing. The dust was patterned. Not in the random way dust settles, but in gentle, concentric whorls, as if something had breathed slowly and regularly across the tabletops for years. I told myself it was drafts. The third detail was the photographs, or rather, the lack of them. Every frame on the walls and side tables held a picture, but every face in every picture had been meticulously scratched out with something sharp, leaving behind only grinning, anonymous voids. I spent the first day airing the place out, my footsteps echoing too loudly in the empty rooms. I found Aunt Alara's journal in a desk drawer, its pages filled with the same frantic script. Most entries were mundane, weather reports, grocery lists. But scattered throughout were single, chilling lines. The house is dreaming again. It doesn't like the new linoleum. I heard it singing in the walls last night. A lullaby. It thinks I'm a child. I laughed, a brittle sound that died quickly in the thick air. She was clearly unwell. That night, as I lay in the creaking four-poster bed, the silence was absolute. No crickets, no wind, just a deep, profound quiet, and then I heard the first breath. It wasn't mine. It was a long, slow, shuddering inhalation that seemed to come from the wall behind my head. I froze, my own breath caught in my throat. A matching, weary exhalation followed, rustling the curtains. The house settling, I told myself. Old wood expands and contracts. But this was rhythmic, deliberate, in and out, in and out. I spent the night rigid with fear, listening to the house breathe me to sleep. Hey, before we go further, let me ask you guys something. Have you ever been alone in a place and just felt, deep in your bones, that the space itself was aware of you? That the walls were watching? Comment below with your creepiest sentient building story. I read them all. The breathing became the background noise of my life there. During the day, it was faint, a whisper in the floorboards when I walked, a sigh from the fireplace flue. I tried to rationalize it. Whined through a specific crack, maybe a natural underground spring echoing through the foundation. I called a handyman from the nearest town, a grizzled man named Bud. He walked through, tapping walls, frowning at the beams. "Place is solid as a rock," he grunted. "Quietest house I've ever been in." When I mentioned the drafts, the breathing sounds, he just looked at me with pity. "Lonely out here, plays tricks on the mind." He left, and his departure felt like a seal being broken. The isolation closed in, thicker than before. The false safety came a week later. I'd grown almost accustomed to the sounds. I'd started talking to the house, a stupid, desperate habit. "Good morning," I'd say to the silent kitchen. "Cold today," I'd remark to the living room. And one evening, as I was reading by the fire, the breathing stopped, just ceased. The sudden, total silence was more terrifying than the sound had ever been. It was the silence of a predator holding its breath. My heart hammered, and then from the hallway, clear as a bell, came 3 soft, deliberate knocks. Tap, tap, tap. My blood turned to ice. There was no one there. I checked every lock, every window. Nothing, but when I returned to my chair, I found Aunt Alara's journal open on the side table to a page I hadn't read. The entry said, "It knocks when it's hungry." It learned that from the missionaries. They knocked before it ate them. The escalation was swift and vicious after that. The temperature in the cabin would plummet in one room while another became stiflingly hot. I'd find my belongings moved me hairbrush in the oven, my shoes neatly arranged on the roof. The scratched-out faces in the photographs began to heal. Not with features, but with a dark, viscous substance that slowly filled the scratches, making the voids look wet, alive. The worst was the whispering. It started in my sleep, voices too low to understand, threading through my dreams. I'd wake up with words on my tongue I didn't know, my throat sore as if I'd been screaming. The climax happened on the night of the new moon. The darkness outside was absolute, a suffocating velvet. The breathing in the walls was a deep, guttural roar, a beast stirring from a long slumber. The whispers were no longer in my dreams. They filled the air, a chorus of frantic, overlapping pleas and warnings. Don't leave the circle. It wants a mother. The foundation is made of bones. I was sobbing, packing a bag with trembling hands, determined to drive out even if I crashed in the dark. That's when I saw it in the hallway mirror. My reflection wasn't mine. It was Aunt Alara, young and terrified, mouth open in a silent scream. Behind her reflection, the wallpaper was peeling back like shedding skin, and in the dark cavity of the wall, something pulsed, slow and organic. I ran, not for the front door, but for the root cellar, the only stone-lined space in the house. I slammed the heavy door shut, plunging myself into pitch black. The air was cold and smelled of stone and old potatoes. I huddled in the corner, my phone's flashlight a pathetic beacon. Outside the door, the house groaned, wood splintered. The whispers gathered at the cellar door, becoming a single, coherent voice. It was my voice, but twisted, ancient. Ava, it crooned, the sound vibrating through the stone floor. You came home. We've been so empty, we need a new heart, a new memory to beat in the walls. The door began to bulge inward, the old oak groaning. Dark, root-like tendrils, slick with something that glistened in my flashlight beam, slithered through the cracks. They didn't move like plants, they moved like seeking fingers, like veins pumping with black blood. I scrambled back until I hit the wall. The stone was warm, no, it was hot. And it was beating, a slow, rhythmic thump, 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 thump. I placed my hand against it and felt the vibration travel up my arm. It wasn't the house's foundation, it was a heart, the cabin's heart. And it was beating in time with my own terrified pulse. The tendrils found my ankle, cold and impossibly strong. They didn't pull me. They absorbed me, my skin growing numb where they touched, the sensation draining away as if becoming part of the stone floor. In that final, clarity-bringing moment of horror, I understood. Aunt Alara didn't go mad. The house didn't drive her insane. It married her. It consumed her memories, her fears, her very essence, and made her a part of its endless, hungry dream. And now it was courting me, I write this now by the light of my dying phone, sitting on the warm, beating stone. The tendrils have receded. The whispers have softened to a gentle, lulling hum. The door to the cellar is gone, seamlessly replaced with more stone wall. I am not trapped. That's the wrong word. I've been absorbed. I can feel the house's dreams now. They're full of the faces from the photographs, the ones it scratched out and swallowed. They're all here, in the walls, in the pipes, in the very grain of the wood. We are the house. And I can feel it getting hungry again. It's learning to use my voice. Soon, it will use it to call for someone new. Maybe a distant cousin, maybe a curious buyer, maybe you. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill down your spine, that sense of dread, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps more than you know. And subscribe for more tales from the dark corners of the world. Share your own experiences with haunted places in the comments below. Until next time, sleep tight, and don't listen too closely to the walls. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more horror stories.